House Republicans putting forth plenty of bombast.
If we had a box of all the foreign money the Bidens took, it would have reached to the ceiling.
But as Democrats noted, no new evidence.
What's missing, despite years of investigation, is the smoking gun that connects Joe Biden to his never-do-well son's corruption.
As the GOP convened its first hearing in the impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. Even as Republicans tried to drive home claims of Biden family corruption,
Hunter Biden referred to access to his father as the keys to his family's only asset. Those words are going to come back and haunt Hunter Biden and his family forever.
Their own witnesses failed to back them up, noting that Republicans are currently operating on allegations rather than hard facts.
I do not believe that the current evidence would support articles of impeachment. That is something that an inquiry has to establish.
I am not here today to even suggest that there was corruption, fraud, or any wrongdoing. In my opinion, more information needs to be gathered and assessed before I would make such an assessment.
Republicans kicking off an impeachment inquiry that's set to explore whether Joe Biden performed any official acts, traded access, or offered the perception of access in exchange for money from foreign interests to either him or his family. Also on the GOP agenda, whether Joe Biden meddled in investigations into Hunter Biden.
Whether it was lunches, phone calls, White House meetings, or official foreign trips, Hunter Biden cashed in by arranging access to Joe Biden, the family brand.
But the GOP has not uncovered any proof Joe Biden benefited from his son Hunter Biden's overseas business deals or intervened in Hunter Biden's criminal prosecution.
You will acknowledge, will you not, that in order to have a criminal act of public corruption or bribery, there must be, under McDonnell, an official act in connection to some sort of personal benefit. Isn't that right?
Gentlemen's time's expired, but Mr. Turley, please answer the question.
Yeah, I can just point you to my testimony. I talk about quid
Just
pro
answer
quo.
the question.
Yeah, because it's a little more complex.
No, it's not. An official act for a personal benefit.
In a hearing that, at times, grew testy.
You keep speaking about no evidence. Why don't you all just listen and
I'm
learn?
trying to introduce evidence.
You've already had your
Is it
share of evidence.
Democrats ultimately slammed their colleagues for pressing ahead with an impeachment inquiry amid a looming government shutdown.
It is incredible that we are holding this sham hearing 2 days before the government will shut down.
Sarah Murray, CNN, Washington.
I'm joined now by Republican Congressman Ken Buck of Colorado. He's a member of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, who recently wrote in an op-ed, quote, "There's not a strong connection at this point between the evidence on Hunter Biden and any evidence connecting the president." Congressman, did you hear anything today that changed your mind?
No, I did not hear anything today. I did not sit through those hearings. I had other hearings to attend, but I certainly read the summaries of the testimony. I think Professor Turley is someone who carries great credibility in the House and in the Judiciary Committee. And when he says there's not enough evidence to warrant an impeachment, I think it's pretty clear that the evidence, while the investigation is ongoing, just isn't there at this point in time.
A Republican aide described today's impeachment hearing to CNN as an unmitigated disaster. Did Chairman Comer's witnesses undermine his own narrative, trying to link President Biden financially to his son?
Yeah, and here's the real problem, as I see it, Anderson. Once you start using the word impeachment, you've set expectations with a large percentage of the American public, and those expectations aren't being met at this point. It would have been much wiser to have continued the investigations, and if you get information that links President Biden with Hunter Biden's activities, then you start talking about impeachment. They came out of the box way too early. I don't know if it was intended as a distraction for the upcoming shutdown or certainly continuing resolution that we have to pass, or whether it was just a bad play, but it is not a good idea to have these two things coming together at the same time, in my opinion.
Is unmitigated disaster, which was an unnamed Republican aide told CNN, is that a term you would use?
No, I think it can be mitigated by further evidence, but I don't think it was a wise move to do at this point in time.
When you look at, let's talk about the impeachment inquiry and the shutdown, as you just mentioned. When you look at it juxtaposed with the government shutdown, does it concern you about House Republicans' priorities here?
It concerns me about House Republicans' priorities. It also concerns me about the public perception of our party being able to run the U.S. House. I think that there is nothing worse than a shutdown. I think this is an embarrassment. We knew that September 30th was coming for a long time. We should have been talking in July about a continuing resolution. It doesn't have to be done on the eve of a shutdown.
In terms of the optics, if there's a shutdown, should the impeachment inquiry pause while federal employees and members of the military aren't being paid? Because CNN's reported that the impeachment inquiry will be deemed essential work.
Yeah, I don't know. I am keeping about half of my staff as essential, and the other half will get paid when the shutdown's over. I don't know exactly how they're going to parse out who is essential and who's not, but I do think that it should go on the back burner until we finish with the continuing resolution and start funding the government.
Some members of the House Freedom Caucus, which you're a member, have sent a letter to Speaker McCarthy demanding he provide a, quote, clear plan on spending as the House grapples with the prospect of not only a stopgap measure to fund the government, but also multiple long-term appropriations bills. You did not sign the letter. Can you talk about why?
Yeah, I think it's really inappropriate to start publicizing things. If we're going to have meetings in the Republican family, we should do it behind closed doors, number one. And number two, I think it is when they start adding Ukraine in as one of their demands that we shouldn't fund Ukraine anymore, I'm just not in with that. I think we've got to make sure that Putin does not win this war, and I think we have to make sure that we support Ukraine to the point that we can and be realistic about it. But I really think that they're conflating some issues that don't need to be conflated at this point.
The Speaker refused to say tonight whether he'd cut a deal with Democrats to keep the government funded. Understandable, he wouldn't say that at this stage. That would ensure, probably, I assume that would ensure, or you can weigh in, an effort to oust him from the Speaker's office. Have you decided how you would vote in that scenario?
I don't know the scenario yet. Let's see what happens. If the Senate bill comes over, does the Speaker choose a clean CR as opposed to the Senate bill? There are a lot of moving parts at this point. I'm just not willing to, at this point, make any commitment on a motion to vacate.